Good afternoon. Welcome to the second edition of the MLF1 podcast. I'm Limo Taboi, and I'm with my guest host, Moses Kemibaro. Moses, nice to see you today.
Thanks for having me here, Limo. It's such a pleasure.
I'd hoped we would have this discussion a few weeks ago, but before the season started, but now we have the benefit of one race. Did you watch Bahrain last weekend?
Oh, yes, I watched it. Started off with a lot of trepidation, but delighted at how the race went, their results, and of course, a big supporter of Hamilton and Mercedes. I'm thrilled at what outcomes we got, given that we didn't expect to get much out of that race.
So it's a new race. It's a new season. We had Ferrari with a 1-2. We had Mercedes kind of getting lucky into some points. We had Red Bull with unfortunate did not finish for both cars in spectacular fashion. And then we can go down the list. But what are your views about Bahrain, the new season, the new cars, and the new rules?
I think obviously the first one, the big one, right? Because I think as you and I have followed Formula One for so long, I think we both followed it together here in Nairobi for over 15 years.
Oh, yeah.
The early boys of F1, as it were, in Kenya. The big surprise, I think, for me was that, we finally were able to validate that obviously Mercedes were in a bad place, right? And then that was from, the free practice sessions during qualifying. They just didn't have the straight line speed. They just didn't have the performance. And of course, we had Hamilton, qualifying fifth. So that was really the first sign that, the last 8 years of dominance are essentially over. Number two, you couldn't deny that there was a really nice dice, even in qualifying between Verstappen and Leclerc. And you could see that, actually, whereas I suspect the Red Bull might actually be a better car all round, Leclerc was somehow able to drag the Ferrari to the front of the grid and actually, hold that position for the start of the race. Other developments in that race, I think that were interesting. I mean, as expected, Perez put up a good fight and he came in fourth for Red Bull, just behind the other Ferrari of Sainz. But I think the other big shockers in qualifying and also in the race are obviously Haas, right?
Oh, yes.
Through Mick Schumacher and obviously Magnussen, who, as we know, just came back to Formula One barely 2 weeks ago and had a spectacular result.
Absolutely.
Finishing fifth in the race, which actually means Haas, shockingly, amazingly, as a team that was at the back of the grid for the last 2 years or so, was able to actually third in the Constructors' Championship now. And then, of course, you just had to look at the rest of the field. We had the new guy from China scoring a point. We had a decent result from both Hamilton and Russell coming in, on the podium and also coming in fourth. So nice haul of points. Mercedes is now second in the Constructors. But I think I just love the fact also that Ferrari do feel like the Ferrari of the glorious days of Schumacher, putting in an amazing performance, clearly a class above the rest with the exception of Red Bull. And you can see a nice dice forming between the Red Bull team and Ferrari once, of course, Red Bull get over the issues that caused them to have a double DNF, which I believe was a fuel pump issue.
Okay.
So very keen to see how, that plays out going into this weekend when we have Saudi also running.
It was an amazing race in terms of it being kind of no contact race, very low attrition except for the Red Bulls and Gasly's car fire. Do you think teams had told their drivers to be gentle with the cars? Don't be like Mazepin last year, where his first race lasted 3 corners. Maybe take some time, discover the car, and let's learn from it, even as you learn from it.
Yeah, one thing I think was very clear to me, and even I think some of the guidance that, say, Verstappen had in the race earlier, where they told him to take it easy, not to overdo it to the tires. You get the sense that teams are still learning the cars, right? They don't know how durable they are. They don't know how the engines are going to perform. They don't know how the tires are going to perform. I think even people were saying that, Mercedes ran the hard tire. I think the only team that ran the hard tire during the race were using it as a test session to just see how durable and how good they are. And of course, they discovered they weren't pretty good on the race. But I think right now it's unknown territory. And I think even going to Saudi in the next 2, 3, 4 races, everyone is just going to be learning what works and what doesn't work. Mercedes confirmed that the wing was giving them a lot of drag, so they're going to try and trim that for the race in Saudi. So it's early days. No one really knows where they really are in terms of the long-term picture, the long-term frame. I think everyone is still sort of understanding the performance, the durability, the reliability, what changes they need to make to get the most out of the cars.
So we have new cars. We have was a new no badgeboard cars, but Mercedes also went further and said "No, we won't even have side pods on our cars." And I think if Ferrari had not been so dominant, we would be discussing the Mercedes car design, the radical design they took, say versus Red Bull and versus other cars. And then you have the new larger tires, which may result in slower pit stops. So what do you think about the new cars and the wings and other elements?
Yeah, I think for me, when we saw last year, was it the year before, when they first showcased the sort of the prototype that the FIA put together to show what the new car might look like. I think there was a sense that the designs of the cars were going to look very similar, meaning that in order to adhere to the new regulations, they would be significantly similar to each other. But what we're learning very clearly is that every team has a different design philosophy, and the interpretation of the new regulations has shown that there's incredible creativity in how you do it. So case in point is Mercedes. They have no side pod effectively.
Yes.
It's just the way they've mounted the cooling elements and all the they're apparently using some rocket spaceship technology to do the cooling, which allows them to have a very slim side pod. We're finding that many cars are struggling with, I think, the ground effects, where they have something called porpoising,
Yes.
where the vehicles are bouncing a lot, and that's where Mercedes seems to be struggling the most. So for me, I think when you look at the design and the presentation of the vehicles, a lot of diversity in sort of the grid, and you see that some of the midfield teams have now come forward, some of the top teams have gone back,
Yes.
and there's a really sort of a complete mix-up in terms of those who got it right and those who got it wrong. I think another thing we're seeing is that the power unit is a major factor, and you notice that a lot of Ferrari cars were very much at the front of the grid. We saw Haas, we saw Alfa Romeo, we saw Ferrari. All those cars, even in qualifying, were doing exceptionally well.
It's a shock after the last 2 years.
Exactly. And I think already by the end of last year, we started to see that this new power unit that they started testing, I think at the end of the last season, was definitely starting to show the promise. But yeah, the design philosophies, I think the most radicals are probably Mercedes and, the very curvy side pod areas that you see on the Ferrari, which creates downforce. So many interpretations, so many differences in terms of how the cars are actually designed and built now.
Do you think the result was a one-off, or that will be the tone for the rest of the season?
I think it's going to be a very close battle between Red Bull and Ferrari going forward. It's very clear that those two are a class above the rest. I think even Mercedes was up to a second slower per lap. And of course the other teams are behind them. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out between the two teammates going forward, both for Ferrari and Red Bull. I think really it's between those two teams. But here's the thing. When I started monitoring the communication and the media coverage after the race and the things that Hamilton said and what's going on around the Mercedes team, you start to get a sense that Mercedes might be coming back within a shorter period of time than we thought. We think that maybe this whole issue could last a whole season, but I'm starting to suspect that maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 races in a season when there's 23 races, Mercedes might actually be in the mix again at the front.
That's interesting. I mean, Hamilton was remarkably confident at the end of the race, really, I think, relieved and giving the team a pep talk even as he was cooling down. And we're going on to Saudi Arabia in just 3 days' time. And it's a few days break. And Saudi Arabia last year was, I think, the peak of Hamilton's resurgence. As you said, don't count him out. When he came to Saudi Arabia last year, he won his third race in a row. And Saudi Arabia last year was really, I think, the flashpoint of the season before Abu Dhabi, because we had a very volatile race. You had 2 red flags. You had lots of car crashes. I think really the tension of the whole season had built up. And you had some remarkable incidents between Hamilton and Verstappen.
Exactly.
So this time, Saudi Arabia is at the beginning of the season. How do you think the race will play out on Sunday?
I mean, if I was to put my money down, I'd say it's between, again, Red Bull, obviously Verstappen, and then I think within the Ferrari camp, I would say that Leclerc seems like the better driver possibly at first glance, but Sainz also, remember, took away more points last year.
Yes.
And I think those guys are very close. It could go either way. And I think, yes, Leclerc seems to have more natural talent, more capability on the grid, but it could go back and forth between Sainz and Leclerc in the same way that we saw with Rosberg and Hamilton going back to those years.
Yes.
So between those three guys, and of course Perez, I mean, he's an old guard, he's an old guy in this game, but he too could be a joker in the pack We don't know. This could be the last opportunity for him to win a championship. So if he's really going to go for it, he's got to use this opportunity this year to pull it off, because we don't know how things are going to settle down over the rest of the season and next year. But yeah, to me, I think when I think about Saudi, it's a very fast track. It's going to favor straight line speed. It's going to be a track that is definitely geared more towards the Ferrari and the Red Bull at this point in time.
The second longest track on the circuit, very fast circuit, as you said. And I was just reading this afternoon that drivers complained last year about a lot of blind corners on the track, and the indications that some modifications have been made to enable drivers to see better around corners. I think 4 corners have been adjusted, and so drivers will be able to have their cars kiss the barriers instead of going into them.
Yeah.
Do you think it will be, now that teams know their cars better, you think there'll be a bit more aggression? Hopefully not as much as last year.
I think there's still a learning curve here, right? A new car, slightly modified track. We know it's a road track, so it's bumpy. That has indications, possible implications for the downforce,
Yes,
or rather the ground effects. But I think it's still early days. I think everyone is going in there a little bit, learning as they go, where to push it, where to change, the wings and so forth to get the right performance. But for sure, I mean, I think we're going to see, given what we saw last year, potentially a number of crashes, especially when they're pushing hard on qualifying and so forth. But definitely a journey into the unknown, again, just given the fact that this is race number 2.
So far, the story of the season after one race is the Haas team, and who have had a very astonishing off-season. You had them having their main sponsor, Ural Kali, team sponsored by a Russian, you don't call them oligarchs, but a wealthy Russian entrepreneur whose son drives for the team. But in the wake of the Ukraine invasion by Russia, the sport really came down hard. Okay, not just Formula One. You've seen football, you've seen Chelsea, Roman Abramovich and his 19-year control of the team. You've had Russia basically knocked out of other professional sports. It's a bit contentious, but are you a bit surprised about how Haas have handled their sponsorship, cutting their main sponsor off and cutting their second driver off?
I think it was somewhat inevitable. I mean, even if you looked at the livery on the car, it was very Russian. The color scheme was practically the Russian flag, right?
Okay.
Through the Uralkali sponsorship. But for sure, the Mazepin question is there. I think there's been question marks around his absolute talent. Obviously, the last 2 years, that car has not been good. Haas has been really at the back of the field. And all along, they've been saying, we're waiting for 2022. They were putting everything into 2022.
Wow.
They did not develop the 2020 car at all in 2021.
Yes.
So they knew they had a dog of a car. It was just about getting through the season and preparing for this moment. And I think they couldn't have gotten a better driver than Magnussen to take over from Mazepin, especially and ironically, given that the money that they got from Mazepin Senior
Yes.
Was essentially the fuel that must have been used to finance all the fantastic things they've done on this car. And from the get-go, I mean, Magnussen, who's just been back in Formula One for 2 weeks,
Yes.
Was in the car and immediately said, this car is amazing. So imagine it's a bit rusty. I mean, is there any possibility a podium is possible? I think it could happen.
Yes.
The guy is still learning the car. He's, out of the F1 for a whole year, comes back, immediately is on the pace. And don't forget that Magnussen, in his first instance when he was with McLaren, his very first race, he was on the podium.
He was a good driver, yeah.
So he is an exceptional talent. I just don't think he's had the machinery to perform. And maybe we see something quite spectacular this year. And then the Alphas are also looking quite pacey. Again, Ferrari engine.
Yes.
What does that mean? They've got power. They've got pretty good aerodynamics. I think we're going to see a very, very interesting outcomes in the next few races and going forward.
Drive to Survive is a bit of a contentious topic, but I enjoy the episodes because they don't focus on what actually happened on the track. And it's interesting. This week I watched the episode from last season. I think it's episode 4 of season 2, and it focuses on the Haas team last year. And it shows you the management of the team. I don't know. Have you watched it?
I've watched it, the whole thing, back to back. I did a complete binge watch on it.
Okay. That's the last one I watched. But to see Mazepin Seniors, how involved he is in the career of his son, how involved he was as a sponsor last year, and when his son was a rookie, and
all the way through,
being concerned about, are you giving my son what he deserves? Are you giving him a a car as good as his teammate. And really, I mean, some dicey moments for Gunter, the manager, who is very popular on the show.
Yeah, very popular with using the F word. But
Yes.
interesting enough, I think those it was very interesting to see that they actually at some point had the cars even swapped
Yes.
because they believed that Mick was getting some kind of advantage that he didn't have, and of course, it didn't help at all. And of course, it's sad to say this, but Mazepin started being called Mazespin
Yes.
because of his tendency to crash or spin the car around on the track. I mean, for sure, the car itself was already a problem. It's a handful to drive.
Yes.
So it might not necessarily be that he's that bad a driver, but you have to ask yourself side by side, why is Mick seemingly able to get more out of the vehicle? But the irony, I think, and when you think about the whole Russian question, is I think globally right now, I think the whole agenda is, hurt anything Russian.
Yes.
So that by putting the pressure on the people and the stakeholders, invariably from a political point of view and social, global economics, the geopolitics of it, so to speak, starts to put pressure on, elements of sport, elements of lifestyle, the oligarchs having their yachts blocked from, docking at various places. It's all about creating pressure so that people, want this war to end, even from the Russian perspective.
Yeah.
But going back again to Haas and the funding, I was shocked at the speed with which he was able to extricate himself from that relationship. And it seems to me that he was very quickly able to secure alternative sponsors to actually keep the team running, because that's always been one of the biggest problems at Haas and why they had questionable drivers and questionable sponsors, because money was always been an issue for them. But you just get the sense that now they have a quality driver, they have a quality car, and potential, obviously, to bring in even better sponsors.
It was a bit funny in Drive to Survive to see Gunter complaining about all the adverts he has to do, small commercials, just to get small checks for the team. And then, as you said, there were concerns about politics and whether Mazepin would be able to get visas to go to some countries to race. And I think that would have been a headache the team would have had to confront over and over. It's like not having a COVID vaccine for in tennis. And I guess they preempted that discussion.
They preempted. I think they moved very quickly, shockingly so. I think they had some kind of contingency plan in place. Magnussen was available. They got him very quickly. They could have gotten a number of other drivers as well. But I just think it's remarkable how fast this team is turning around. Feels almost like the Braun moment to me. Remember Braun and how they were formerly Honda and there was no money and they bootstrapped and they won a championship, which is now, of course, the dominant Mercedes team. But more importantly, it just looks like Haas, possibly on the back of all these changes, could become a spectacular team as well.
That would be nice to see.
Yeah.
Haas world champion.
Potentially, who knows?
Do you think the sport has gone too far in cancelling Russia, and is it over? You have Azerbaijan in a few weeks, which is a former CIS state. Do you think the Mazepin family have said we want our money back? Do you think this is just politics which will be settled in court quietly, or it's a real issue F1 will still have to confront?
I think they have to confront it, and I think even as they go into locations and states where might be seen to be Russia friendly and so forth, there will be implications. But long and short of it, I think this is going to blow over. I think Formula One as a sport in some ways is bigger than some of these geopolitical issues, and where there's a problem, they will find either different drivers or different sponsors or even different venues for future races where there's an overlap. But for sure, I think it's warranted. I think it's the only way to put significant pressure to bring this war to an end at a level where the average Russian or the average person from Russia feels some of the pain and therefore some of the incentive to sort of sit on the side of, hey, we're really struggling here, we're suffering because of this war. So if we can end, then we'll be more than happy for it to do so.
Okay. F1 next goes to Saudi Arabia, probably another equally controversial venue. But another issue which is now affecting the sport is something which they have done remarkably well in the last 2.5 years, which is managing COVID. Yeah, the 2020 season was abbreviated by COVID, but they managed to get through that. I think just one incident with Hamilton near the end, and last year was quite a remarkable year. And again, back to Drive to Survive, it was interesting to see Hamilton last year at Silverstone, where he had won, and wanting to interact with his fans, but then was very concerned about, look, I can't catch COVID because it may affect my position in the championship. And then sure enough, you now have the start of the season where Ricardo got COVID and was almost not about to race. He managed to race, and whether he recovered or not, he finished ahead of his teammate. And then you had Vettel not able to race and replaced by Hulkenberg. Do you think countries are lowering barriers too fast? And what can the sport do to manage and not have more recurrences of COVID?
I think the big difference between 2020 and 2021 is obviously the number of people who've been vaccinated globally, right? So in 2020, I mean, even you recall this for yourself. I mean, you just were very, very careful, all of us,
Yes.
would leave our shoes outside the house, would wash everything. We were extremely careful.
Wash groceries.
Exactly, and now, we're not even wearing masks most of the time, but for as long as you've been vaccinated, there's a sense of confidence that you're okay. And I think the same thing within the paddock, people are possibly relaxing, and that's why you see Vettel, Ricardo, and, people are still getting COVID. But there's this sense of, okay, you'll get it, it'll not be as bad because, you have this vaccination. So I think the vaccines have definitely created a sense of safety or a feeling of confidence. You don't get as sick when you've been vaccinated. And it's no longer the big deal it was, let's say, 2 years ago.
Okay.
Although, again, there are constant reminders, as you just pointed out, Vettel, Ricardo, both getting sick this year. And of course, the regulations are very clear. For as long as you're giving a positive test, then you can't drive. Again, those are sort of things that could have major implications for the championship.
I think I just saw Vettel is still not out of the woods.
Really?
Yeah.
So Hulkenberg might be driving this weekend.
So it's still, I think they'll know it's kind of day to day, but he has to.
Yeah, but he's not at full strength, huh?
Not yet back.
Wow. So there you go. I mean, implications right there. I mean, if Leclerc or Verstappen got it, would it mean 1 or 2 races out? Does that decide the championship? If Leclerc gets it, what does that mean? So for sure, it's a real and present danger in terms of, final outcomes and also the races that happen and what the results can be.
Okay. And so 2022, as you said, vaccinations have been done, and F1 goes back to three circuits, which it has been missing for the last 3 years. So Australia in April 10th, Singapore and Japan. I think those are very closed societies who are welcoming back F1, the crowds, the teams, and wish them the best.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm really excited because I always felt like, historically, Australia always felt for me like the beginning of the year, the start of the season. And of course, now things have kind of gotten mixed up a little bit. But yeah, Australia for me was always a feeling of this is the beginning of Formula One, the odd timing.
Yes.
I remember back in the day, even meeting at places like Soho and would be
morning races
and watching those morning races, Japan, and so forth. So I'm pretty excited because, again, the time difference is always a bit different. Although in many of those countries, they're very, very strict around COVID.
Yes.
Of course, everyone is relaxing a bit, but, there's every possibility some of those destinations could cancel if they have a breakout or they're just not confident. But it'll be very exciting to see some of these tracks coming back. And as you know, again, some of the new drivers have not even driven those in Formula One yet. Okay. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how that turns out.
And Australia has been heavily modified, but we've not seen it for 2 years.
Really, yeah? Okay.
So the park track, there are clips on YouTube, but no one has seen it and no one, at least maybe Hamilton and Vettel, will be familiar with. But that's the old track now compared to what they have now.
Yeah, okay. The famous Wall of Champions.
Hopefully no one, we'll see how the park goes,
Okay.
And finally, we come back to Kenya. We had the passing a few weeks ago of a Kenyan rally legend, Vic Preston Jr., who raced for about 19 years in the Safari Rally. I think his best finishes were second in 1978 for Porsche, and then he finished third twice in 72 and 1980 for Ford and Mercedes. He's also the Kenya National Rally Champion in 1985, when I think he had a clean sweep of the whole season. At the time, he was testing out a Lancia car, and I think he was one of the few Kenyan drivers who had real works team's experience.
Yeah.
What do you remember about him?
I mean, when I think about Vic Preston, the impressions I have, because obviously I was very young at the time.
Yeah.
But I remember he was fast. I remember he was always in the sort of the top stacks, when it comes to the Safari Rally. I definitely remember the Lancia years where he was driving, I think, a works car during that time. And yeah, he was just one of those people who was very clearly an exceptional talent. Somebody who clearly was fast behind the wheel, and he was able to hold his own against many of the international drivers. So he was, at least within the Safari Rally, naturally talented, had the speed, had the ability to get the confidence of the works teams to give him a car. And I mean, I think Kenya's lost a legend right there. It's sad that I think maybe today many of the younger people may not have a context of who he was or what he accomplished in relation or in the context of Safari Rally. But he was definitely right up there with the best. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
The Shekametas and all those. Yeah.
Led, I think, the whole of almost 3/4 of the 1983 Safari, and many people expected him to win, but he had some car trouble and then a crash later on, and then Lancia worked with him for several years, and his work paid off because after the team was able to win 2 Safari rallies on their own. And so wish him the best, wish the family the best, and we need to discover more about our motorsports legends.
Absolutely. May he rest in peace.
Okay. So thank you. We're coming to the end of the second episode today. Thank you, Moses, for hanging with us. Thank you, Semabox, podcasting incubator here at the Baraza Media Lab with the Crown Prince of Benga, Dan Nacheda. Follow us, MLF1 Podcast, on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you, Moses. He's Moses at Moses Kemibaro. I'm Limo Taboi at Pankelele. It's F1 weekend. We have practice on Friday at 5 and 8, qualifying on Saturday at 8, and the race on Sunday at 8. Moses, you've said Red Bull, Ferrari.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's between the two. And I think Red Bull probably have gotten over their gremlins from last weekend with the fuel pump issue. So again, my bets are on a dice between Leclerc and Verstappen right at the front.
Where will you be watching the race? Do you know, or it's open?
Well, I'm always on F1.com. I watch the streaming package, and I generally watch the race at home these days, thanks to COVID.
Okay. Thank you so much. We'll catch up with you guys next time. Enjoy the race in Saudi Arabia, and we hope to be back to discuss Australia and a few more races this season. Have a nice day.